The air inside the grand courthouse was thick with an unspoken tension, a silent battle waged before a single word was spoken. The weight of history pressed against the polished wooden panels, whispering of past trials where power had bent justice to its will. Today, however, was different. Today, the man who had spent his life above consequence would finally be forced to reckon with it. Maxwell Harrington, billionaire, mogul, untouchable, until now, strode into the courtroom with an arrogance so palpable it seemed to suck the air from the room. His suit, tailored to perfection, was more than just fabric. It was armor, a declaration that he still believed himself untouchable. But the moment his gaze locked with Judge Angela Thompson's, something in the foundation of his certainty shifted. For the first time in his life, Maxwell felt something foreign coil in his chest, not power, not control, but the chilling edge of uncertainty. The courtroom hushed, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting to see if justice would finally outweigh privilege. As the sun cast a golden hue over the city, the grand courthouse stood as a symbol of justice, its imposing facade daring anyone to challenge the law within. Among the throng of people entering, one figure stood out, Maxwell Harrington, a billionaire known not just for his wealth but also for his brazen demeanor. He was a man who had cultivated an empire built on real estate and technology, a figure whose name was synonymous with power and influence. In boardrooms and social gatherings, he commanded respect, often dismissing any notion that his privilege could be questioned. Maxwell strode into the courtroom with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Clad in an impeccably tailored suit, he exuded an air of superiority, a man unaccustomed to being challenged or held accountable. The clamor of the bustling hallway faded as he entered the courtroom, leaving behind whispers of awe and disdain. To many, he was an icon of success. To others, he was the embodiment of entitlement. His very presence seemed to overshadow those around him, casting long shadows over both justice and equality. As he took his seat among the defendants, Maxwell's gaze swept around the room with a sense of disdain. He scrutinized the other figures present, lawyers flipping through case files, jurors waiting patiently for proceedings to commence. Yet when his eyes landed on Judge Angela Thompson, the first black woman to preside over this court, something shifted beneath his polished exterior. It was as if her very presence rattled him. He felt a flicker of discomfort that his wealth could not dispel. Judge Thompson entered with poise and authority, her reputation as a fair but formidable judge preceding her. She had climbed through the ranks in a system designed to stifle voices like hers and had earned every ounce of respect she commanded. Yet here was Maxwell, sitting casually in his seat, exhibiting an act of defiance that would reverberate throughout the courtroom. As she approached her bench, rather than rise in acknowledgement, a customary gesture of respect, Maxwell remained seated, arms crossed defiantly. The silence that followed was palpable. Gasps erupted from some spectators. Others exchanged incredulous glances. That moment cemented Maxwell's decision to assert his superiority, a clear act of racism that belied any pretense of civility he might have wished to maintain. In that instant, it became evident that this was not merely a courtroom drama unfolding. It was a confrontation between privilege and justice. Judge Thompson's expression remained composed despite the provocation. She had seen this arrogance before but rarely so openly displayed in her courtroom. Every fiber of her being bristled at the disrespect shown not just towards her but toward the entire system she represented. In that moment, something ignited within her, a fierce resolve to ensure that such behavior would not go unchallenged. Maxwell Harrington had crossed an invisible line drawn by years of struggle against prejudice and inequality. Little did he know that this act would set off a chain reaction that would unravel not just his standing in society, but also force him to confront the uncomfortable truths about himself and the world around him. The stage was set for a battle either side could have predicted, one where entitlement met justice head-on in a fight for accountability and change. The courtroom was a vast chamber filled with the weight of history and the echoes of countless decisions that had shaped lives. Tall wooden panels lined the walls, their deep mahogany finish polished to a gleam, reflecting the flickering overhead lights that mingled with natural sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Today, however, the ambience was thick with tension, as if the very air had become charged with anticipation and unease. As spectators took their seats, a diverse crowd filled the gallery, individuals from various backgrounds and experiences, each brought together by the unfolding drama. Some wore formal attire, representatives of legal practices and advocacy groups, while others were community members seeking to witness their justice system in action. The juxtaposition of faces, ranging from somber to anxious, spoke volumes about the stakes involved not only for Maxwell Harrington but for the broader implications of this case. At the center of it all was Judge Angela Thompson, whose presence commanded immediate respect. Clad in her black robe, she stood tall behind her bench, exuding authority and grace. Her reputation as a fair yet relentless judge preceded her, marking her as a force to be reckoned with in a system often skewed against those like her. She had faced opposition throughout her career, breaking barriers and challenging norms in a profession that historically sidelined women of color. Today, she was not just here to preside over a case, she was here to uphold justice in its most profound form. As she glanced at the attentive audience, Angela felt the weight of their expectations resting on her shoulders. Many were there in solidarity, aware that this case transcended the actions of one man. It represented a larger struggle against systemic racism and inequality. The tension in the room was palpable as she raised her gavel, signaling for silence. This was not merely another day in court, it was a reckoning. Maxwell's defiance hung heavily in the air as Judge Thompson maintained her composure. The slight gesture, or lack thereof, of him remaining seated was more than just a breach of courtroom etiquette. It was an affront to the very principles of respect and acknowledgement that underpin judicial proceedings. The murmuring among spectators turned into gasps as they processed his blatant disrespect, their emotions swirling between disbelief and indignation. What made this scenario even more striking was the stark contrast between Maxwell's brazen arrogance and Angela's quiet yet powerful demeanor. His wealth and influence had afforded him many privileges throughout his life, allowing him to operate above the rules that governed others. Yet here, in this space, those privileges meant nothing against the authority of a judge determined to shatter the glass ceiling of complacency. As Angela prepared to address the courtroom, her heart raced, not from fear but from a deep-rooted determination to assert her authority and challenge the status quo. In this moment, she became a beacon not just for herself but for all who had ever been marginalized or silenced by systemic prejudices. This case would serve as a pivotal moment, not just for Maxwell Harrington or even for Angela Thompson, but for society at large. With one swift motion, she lifted her gavel and struck it against the sound block, setting into motion a chain of events that would reshape lives forever. The echoes reverberated through the space, a clarion call for justice that reverberated far beyond those courtroom walls. The battle lines were drawn. Privilege would clash with accountability in a way that would not soon be forgotten. As Judge Angela Thompson entered the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted palpably, a silent acknowledgement of her authority filling the space. She walked with purpose, her robes sweeping gracefully with each deliberate step. Observers could sense the significance of the moment. This was not merely another day of hearings, but a defining statement about representation and power in a system that had often sidelined voices like hers. Yet, among the crowd, one individual remained unyielding to the gravity of her arrival. Maxwell Harrington sat at the defendant's table, arms crossed defiantly and a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He oozed entitlement, his sharp suit bespoke of wealth but also of a fundamental ignorance, an ignorance compounded by privilege that had isolated him from the consequences of his actions. As Judge Thompson took her place on the bench, he chose to remain seated, an act that seemed almost calculated, dismissing not just her but what she represented. The brief silence in the courtroom swelled with tension as the gasps from spectators rippled through the audience, an instinctual reaction to what they witnessed. Judge Thompson paused momentarily, processing the implications of Maxwell's blatant disrespect. This was more than a breach of decorum. It was a public assertion of superiority over someone who had risen against all odds to claim her rightful place in the judicial system. In that moment, his refusal to stand felt like an affront not just to Angela, but to every individual who had ever fought against systemic oppression. As she looked around the courtroom, Angela could read the collective disbelief on the faces of those gathered. Many were there to witness a trial that promised to address issues far greater than Maxwell's legal troubles. They came seeking justice and accountability in a world rife with inequality. But here was Harrington, personifying a centuries-old struggle against racial prejudice with a single, selfish act. "Mr. Harrington," she began, her voice calm yet imbued with authority. "It is customary to stand when the court is in session and when a judge enters." Her tone left no ambiguity. This was not a request but an expectation rooted in respect for the legal process and its custodians. Rather than acknowledge her words or rise from his seat, Maxwell leaned back with an unabashed grin. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "I find such gestures rather archaic and beneath me." His dismissive tone reverberated through the courtroom like a challenge thrown down before those assembled. Angela felt an electric surge of resolve coursing through her. This moment would not pass without consequence. She would not allow Maxwell's arrogance to overshadow the progress that had been made in striving for equality and justice. What had begun as an individual's act of defiance would soon become a moment etched into history, a spotlight illuminating the often overlooked realities of those oppressed by systemic inequalities. "Very well," Judge Thompson replied evenly, her eyes locking with his steady gaze. "Your decision to remain seated speaks volumes about your character and understanding of this court's values." The tension in the room amplified as murmurs sparked among spectators witnessing this confrontation unfold before them. Maxwell might have thought he was above reproach, but Angela was steadfast. She would not be intimidated by his wealth or arrogance. The battle lines had been drawn. This was a clash not just between individuals but between justice and privilege, and Angela would fight to ensure that respect was restored within her courtroom and beyond. With her gavel poised to strike, she prepared to take control of the situation, knowing that in this moment of defiance, a greater quest for accountability had begun. The moment Maxwell Harrington remained seated sent shockwaves rippling through the courtroom, transforming the atmosphere into one thick with disbelief and indignation. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mix of shock and dismay. Many had come to this trial with expectations of a legal process steeped in respect for justice. They were not prepared for such a blatant display of contempt. Some jurors shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves, clearly unsettled by the billionaire's arrogance. Attorneys, both for the prosecution and defense, looked on with wide eyes. The prosecutor felt a surge of righteous anger bubbling within. Here was a man who thought himself above the law, unconcerned with the principles that underpinned the very system he was now subject to. Meanwhile, the defense attorney appeared torn between loyalty to his client and an instinctual understanding that this act would have repercussions far beyond just courtroom etiquette. In the gallery, observers couldn't contain their reactions either. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd as people leaned closer together, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others clutched their jaws in frustration. It was as if everyone present understood that Harrington's refusal to stand was not just an affront to Angela Thompson but also to every individual who had ever faced discrimination or prejudice within these walls. Among them were community leaders and activists who had dedicated their lives to fighting against systemic racism. They felt a rush of emotions, anger, solidarity, and determination, as they witnessed this test of wills unfold before them. A woman sitting in the front row could barely contain her voice as she whispered to her companion, "Can you believe this? He thinks he can disrespect her like that." Her eyes widened with indignation as she glanced around at others who seemed equally appalled. The atmosphere was electric. It was a collective gasp of realization that this moment represented something bigger than any single trial. As Judge Thompson stood resolute behind her bench, she caught sight of several heads nodding in silent support from various corners of the courtroom. These small gestures reinforced her sense of purpose. She wasn't just representing herself but also all those who were marginalized by societal hierarchies. Even court personnel were taken aback by Harrington's insolence. The court clerk felt a deep sense of frustration wash over him. He had always believed in the integrity of the judicial process, and could hardly fathom how someone so privileged could dismiss it so easily. Meanwhile, bailiffs exchanged incredulous looks, fully aware that maintaining order meant confronting not only Harrington's arrogance but also the underlying issues it represented. As Judge Thompson prepared to respond to Maxwell's defiance, she felt keenly aware that her words would resonate beyond this courtroom into wider society. The reaction from those assembled was palpable, an audience waiting not only for justice but for accountability in a moment that demanded change. It was clear that this confrontation would not only define Maxwell's fate but might also serve as a catalyst for broader discussions about race and privilege in America's judicial system. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Thompson began once more, her voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions swirling around her. "Your actions today will not go unnoticed." The gravity in her tone commanded attention and respect as she readied herself to confront not just his behavior but also what it symbolized within a society grappling with its own biases and inequalities. It became evident that this encounter would reverberate far beyond these walls, igniting conversations about dignity and respect that needed to be addressed head-on. Judge Angela Thompson stood at her bench, the weight of the moment pressing against her with every heartbeat. Maxwell Harrington's brazen refusal to show basic respect churned within her, igniting a fierce resolve that surged to the forefront of her thoughts. She understood the implications of his actions, not just as a personal affront but as a stark representation of the systemic issues that plagued their society. He had crossed a line, and he needed to understand the consequences of that choice. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, forcing calm into her voice even as her anger simmered just beneath the surface. "Mr. Harrington," she began, projecting authority and poise, "your conduct today is not merely unfortunate, it is indicative of an attitude that perpetuates inequality and disrespect." Her words cut through the charged atmosphere like a knife, drawing attention from every corner of the courtroom. The air crackled with anticipation as attendees leaned in closer, eager to hear how she would address this unprecedented challenge to her authority. Angela's gaze was unwavering. She met his eyes directly, refusing to let him intimidate her with his wealth or his powerful status. In that exchange, it became evident to everyone present that this was not just about courtroom decorum. It was about holding him accountable for his blatant disrespect. "You may view standing as an archaic formality," she continued, her voice steady yet strong. "But it is also an essential expression of respect toward this court, and all who seek justice within its walls." With each word, Angela emphasized the gravity of her position, not only as a judge but as a representative of those who had fought tirelessly for equality and dignity. Maxwell's smirk slipped slightly as he realized she was not about to back down. He opened his mouth to interject, but Angela raised a hand, cutting him off with an authority he had never experienced before. "No," she said firmly. "You will listen." The courtroom quieted further, every pair of eyes fixed on them. Angela sensed that this moment extended beyond mere consequence. It was an opportunity for transformation, a chance to reshape perceptions in a deeply flawed system. She drew from her own experiences navigating such challenges throughout her career, moments where she had faced both skepticism and overt hostility simply because of who she was. "Today," she declared resolutely, "I will not tolerate your arrogance." As murmurs rippled through the audience in response to her words, Angela felt emboldened by their support, an unspoken agreement that what Maxwell had done needed addressing in a profound way. The tension reached its boiling point when she continued, "In this court, we value justice above privilege." Each word resonated deeply with those gathered. It wasn't just a statement about one man's behavior, but a broader indictment against systemic racism and entitlement. "Mr. Harrington," Angela concluded, locking eyes with him once more, "you will face consequences for your actions here today." The finality in her tone left no room for negotiation or dissent. As she prepared to move forward with reprimanding him officially for his conduct, everyone present could sense that this was more than just a trial. It was part of something much larger, an awakening. In that moment, Judge Thompson transformed the tide from meek acceptance of disrespect into an unequivocal declaration against it. She reaffirmed not only her authority, but also the very principles of justice itself, principles that would now underpin every decision rendered within these walls moving forward. Maxwell Harrington may have thought himself untouchable due to his wealth and influence. However, He had underestimated the determination of one woman standing at the helm of justice, ready to hold him, and others like him, accountable in ways they had never expected. Judge Angela Thompson's journey to the bench was paved with challenges that would have deterred many, but her resolve was forged in the fires of adversity. Growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood, she witnessed firsthand the systemic inequalities that plagued her community. Her parents, both educators, instilled in her a deep appreciation for learning and the belief that knowledge was a powerful tool for change. They emphasized the importance of education as a means to overcome societal barriers, and Angela took their lessons to heart. Determined to rise above the limitations often imposed on individuals of color, Angela excelled academically. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, where she majored in political science and later attended law school. During her time at university, she became acutely aware of the biases embedded within legal systems and was struck by the lack of representation for minorities in law. This realization ignited her passion for social justice and reform. After graduating from law school, Angela faced an uphill battle when seeking employment. Many firms were hesitant to hire someone who looked like her, despite her impressive credentials. Yet, she persevered, eventually landing a position at a small public interest law firm that championed civil rights cases. It was here that she honed her skills in advocacy and learned how to navigate the complexities of a judicial system that often favored privilege over justice. Angela's career flourished as she took on challenging cases that addressed discrimination and inequality, fighting tirelessly for those whose voices had been silenced. She quickly gained recognition for her tenacity and commitment to justice, earning accolades from both colleagues and community leaders alike. Her reputation as an advocate for marginalized communities paved the way for her eventual appointment as a judge, an achievement that made history as she became the first black woman to preside over this court. But Angela's journey was not without its trials. Throughout her career, she faced skepticism from those who believed she lacked the authority or capability to hold such a position. Each challenge only fueled her determination. She refused to allow others' prejudices to define her worth or limit her aspirations. In many ways, every case she presided over became more than just legal proceedings. They represented opportunities to challenge systemic biases and pave the way for future generations. As Judge Thompson took her place on the bench that day, she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not just for herself but for all those who had come before her and those yet to follow. She understood that each ruling would echo beyond the courtroom walls, impacting lives in ways that extended far into society. In confronting Maxwell Harrington's blatant disrespect, Angela wasn't merely defending her authority as a judge. She stood as a symbol of resilience against centuries of oppression faced by individuals like herself. The significance of this moment weighed heavily on her. It was about accountability not only for Harrington but also about reinforcing the ideals of respect and fairness within an institution historically biased against people of color. Angela's fierce resolve shone through as she prepared to address Harrington with unwavering authority, her voice embodying years of struggle and triumph against injustice. In reclaiming power within her courtroom, Judge Thompson not only solidified her place in history but also inspired hope in all who witnessed this transformative encounter, a reminder that change is possible when one stands firm against disrespect and inequality. This battle marked not just another day in court but an opportunity to redefine what justice truly looks like in America today. As the tension in the courtroom hung heavy in the air following Maxwell Harrington's blatant disrespect, Judge Angela Thompson took a brief moment to gather her thoughts. The eyes of everyone present, including jurors, attorneys, and observers, were fixed on her, each person waiting with bated breath to see how she would navigate this unprecedented challenge to her authority. With a firm grip on her gavel, she called for order, her voice echoing through the room. "Mr. Harrington, your actions today will not be taken lightly. In this court, we uphold the principle that respect is paramount not just for the judge but for the integrity of justice itself." As she spoke, her demeanor reflected both strength and grace, commanding attention without succumbing to anger. Maxwell smirked, clearly unrepentant, but Angela's resolute gaze did not waver. She motioned for the court clerk to bring forth the charges against him. The charges were serious, allegations surrounding financial misconduct and exploitation that had long plagued his business dealings. As the clerk read them aloud, the atmosphere shifted from one of shock to one of collective anticipation. This was not merely a personal affront. This was an opportunity for justice to take precedence over privilege. Your lack of decorum today reflects a dismissive attitude towards this judicial process, Angela continued, addressing both Harrington and the court. It is time we address not only your behavior but also the actions that have led us here. Her tone remained steady, yet it resonated with a fierce determination to assert her authority and hold him accountable. The prosecutor seized this moment, standing to emphasize the gravity of Harrington's alleged financial violations. Your Honor, he began, addressing Angela with utmost respect. Maxwell Harrington has exploited countless individuals while hiding behind his wealth. This court must set a precedent that no one is above accountability. The audience murmured in agreement. His words struck a chord with many who had witnessed injustice firsthand. Judge Thompson nodded appreciatively at the prosecutor's remarks before turning her gaze back to Harrington. We are here to ensure that justice prevails, she stated resolutely. You may have tried to undermine this court through your actions today, but you will find that justice is unwavering. As proceedings unfolded, it became clear that Angela was in control of the situation. She deftly navigated objections from Harrington's attorney, who attempted to downplay his client's actions by arguing they were merely a misunderstanding. With poise, Judge Thompson countered each argument with facts and legal precedents, refusing to let his wealth or influence dictate the proceedings. The courtroom dynamics shifted dramatically as Angela continued to assert herself. Her clear command began to resonate with those present. Her authority was no longer just an expectation, it became a matter of necessity, as she led them toward accountability. It was as if she were wielding justice like a sword, cutting through barriers that had long protected those like Harrington from facing consequences. Finally, after multiple exchanges filled with heated rhetoric and undeniable evidence against Harrington, Angela addressed him directly once more. Mr. Harrington, she said, her voice steady and unwavering. Your actions have consequences not only for you but for your entire enterprise. We will be holding you accountable for both your financial misdeeds and your blatant disrespect towards this court. With those words hanging in the air, she prepared to issue her ruling. The audience leaned forward in anticipation. They could feel that this moment would resonate beyond just these walls. Judge Thompson had transformed what could have been a display of entitlement into an emblematic stand against systemic injustice. A powerful reminder that respect and accountability are essential tenets in any courtroom and society at large. As she delivered her ruling, it became evident that Maxwell's arrogance would no longer shield him from the repercussions of his actions. In doing so, Judge Angela Thompson not only reaffirmed her authority but also set a transformative precedent that might inspire others facing similar battles against oppression and entitlement in their own lives. As the proceedings continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom became increasingly charged with anticipation. Judge Angela Thompson had demonstrated remarkable control, but there was a palpable tension simmering beneath the surface. The audience, comprised of jurors, legal professionals, and community activists, could sense that this moment was coming to a climax. Everyone waited to see if she would impose penalties severe enough to reflect the gravity of Maxwell Harrington's actions. After carefully considering the arguments presented and reviewing the evidence against Harrington, Angela's resolve solidified. She recognized this as a turning point, not just for Harrington but for the judicial system as a whole. She rose from her seat behind the bench, her presence commanding attention as she prepared to deliver her ruling. Mr. Harrington, she stated, her voice steady and deliberate. Your actions today are not simply a matter of courtroom decorum. They represent a broader disregard for the principles of justice and equality. The silence that followed was deafening, with every eye fixed on her in rapt attention. I have spent my career fighting for those who have been wronged by a system that has too often favored wealth over justice, she continued. Your refusal to stand in this court is emblematic of a larger issue, one that perpetuates inequality and dismisses the very foundation upon which our legal system is built. Harrington's expression shifted from arrogance to apprehension as he absorbed her words. He could no longer mask his disdain with bravado. He felt the gravity of the moment weighing heavily on him. Yet there was still a flicker of defiance in his eyes, as if he believed his status could somehow shield him from repercussions. Given your actions today and the serious allegations against you regarding financial misconduct and exploitation, Angela stated firmly, I am imposing strict penalties. She paused for effect, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. First, you will pay a fine that reflects the egregious nature of your behavior, one that sends a message that entitlement will not go unchecked. The murmurs of shock rippled through the courtroom as Judge Thompson outlined the specifics of the penalties. Additionally, you are mandated to complete a series of community service hours focused on social justice and equity initiatives, she declared. This court demands that you not only acknowledge your past actions but also actively contribute to repairing the harm they have caused. The audience reacted with a mix of disbelief and approval. Many were thrilled to see justice addressed in such a decisive manner. Angela's decision was not merely punitive. It was transformative, aimed at holding Harrington accountable while simultaneously promoting awareness about systemic issues he had perpetuated. Furthermore, she added, her eyes narrowing as she addressed him directly, this court will be closely monitoring your future business dealings. Any further infractions will result in even more severe consequences. Her words carried weight, underscoring her commitment to ensuring that he understood the ramifications of his privilege. As she delivered her ruling, Angela felt a sense of empowerment wash over her. This wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about affirming justice for all those who had been marginalized or disrespected in similar ways. Her strong stance against Harrington's actions signaled to those present that change is possible when individuals stand up against systemic inequalities. Maxwell Harrington sat in stunned silence, grappling with the realization that he could no longer operate above reproach. The very foundations of his empire were now threatened by his own choices and arrogance. Judge Thompson had successfully shifted the narrative, turning this courtroom encounter into a powerful testament to accountability and equity. As she concluded the proceedings, Angela Thompson felt a rush of determination, a profound acknowledgement that this moment marked a new chapter not only for herself but also for everyone who had ever faced discrimination or injustice. In reclaiming power within her courtroom, she had sent a clear message: justice would prevail, and everyone would be held accountable for their actions, regardless of their status or wealth. In the days following Judge Angela Thompson's ruling, the repercussions of Maxwell Harrington's actions began to unfold like a well-timed clock, each tick echoing the unraveling of his carefully constructed empire. The first blow came swiftly, as news of the ruling hit social media and news outlets. Headlines screamed of his courtroom defiance and the judge's strict penalties, painting him as not just a businessman but a symbol of entitlement gone awry. The public was unforgiving. What had once been whispered about behind closed doors now erupted into a full-blown public relations nightmare. Maxwell had always prided himself on maintaining a pristine image, one that showcased his philanthropic endeavors and business acumen. However, in the wake of the ruling, that image began to crack. Business partners who had previously aligned themselves with him suddenly found themselves reconsidering their associations. Many publicly distanced themselves, citing a commitment to ethical practices and social responsibility. "We cannot support someone who disrespects the judicial process," one high-profile partner stated in a press release, leaving Maxwell scrambling to salvage what remained of his connections. As meetings were cancelled and phone calls went unanswered, the reality set in for Harrington. He was losing influence at an alarming rate. His social status, once bolstered by wealth and connections, began to diminish as friends turned into acquaintances. Invitations to exclusive gatherings dwindled, and whispers of disdain followed him wherever he went. What once felt like an untouchable ascent was now a steep decline into obscurity. Financially, the impact was equally severe. Investors who had once poured millions into his ventures began pulling out, fearful of being associated with a man whose reputation was tainted by scandal. Market analysts noted a sharp decline in his company's stock value as uncertainty crept into the investor community. Board meetings that had previously been filled with confidence turned into discussions of crisis management and damage control. Maxwell found himself at the head of a sinking ship, desperately trying to keep it afloat, while the waves of public opinion crashed against it. Meanwhile, media coverage increasingly focused on his past business dealings, unearthing allegations that had long been buried beneath layers of privilege. Investigative reports revealed questionable practices in his companies, raising eyebrows about how he had maintained his wealth for so long. The narrative shifted from that of a successful billionaire to one of exploitation and disregard for fairness in business. In the wake of this turmoil, Angela Thompson's ruling had sparked conversations beyond the courtroom walls. Advocacy groups capitalized on the moment, calling for greater accountability among wealthy individuals in power. They rallied around her decision, using it as a platform to highlight systemic inequalities within the justice system and corporate America. Social media became a battleground where activists demanded change, urging society to hold all individuals, regardless of their wealth or status, accountable for their actions. As Maxwell navigated this new landscape filled with consequences, Angela's voice echoed in his mind. "Your actions have consequences." He began to realize that the arrogance that had once shielded him from repercussions now left him vulnerable in ways he had never anticipated. The very foundations of his empire were crumbling, revealing the fragility that lay beneath a facade of invulnerability. Feeling cornered and desperate, Maxwell faced an internal reckoning. He was forced to confront not only the loss of his status and wealth but also the deep-seated beliefs that had allowed him to act without regard for those he impacted. In this moment of reflection, he understood that true power was not derived solely from wealth but from respect, integrity, and accountability, qualities he had dismissed for far too long. The fallout from Judge Thompson's ruling had reshaped his life entirely. It was a stark reminder that actions have consequences, ones that could unravel even the mightiest empires built on arrogance and entitlement. As he grappled with this new reality, Maxwell Harrington began to question whether he could reclaim his former life or if he was destined to start anew amid the ruins of his past. The media quickly seized upon the dramatic courtroom incident between Judge Angela Thompson and billionaire Maxwell Harrington, amplifying the narrative through various lenses that focused on power dynamics, entitlement, and race. Headlines erupted across platforms, with newspapers and online publications presenting contrasting viewpoints that heightened public interest. "Billionaire's defiance in court, a microcosm of racism," one article declared, while another framed it as Judge Thompson's powerful stand against privilege. Each angle shaped a different perception of the figures involved. Television news segments juxtaposed footage of Harrington's smirk during the proceedings with clips of Judge Thompson delivering her ruling with unwavering authority. This stark contrast between his arrogance and her composure resonated deeply, prompting viewers to not only consider their individual experiences with privilege and justice but also reflect on broader systemic issues. The visuals of a powerful black woman standing tall against an affluent white man sparked conversations about race that transcended the courtroom. Social media erupted in reaction to the verdict, with users mobilizing around hashtags like #JusticeForAngela and #AccountabilityOverPrivilege. Advocacy groups recognized the moment as a catalyst for discussions about racial inequality in both the legal system and corporate America. Content creators and influencers dissected every aspect of the case, from Harrington's actions to Thompson's handling of the situation. Their discussions brought attention to themes that had often been sidelined: how race intersects with power and how societal structures perpetuate inequalities. Podcasts delved into analysis surrounding the implications of Harrington's defiance, exploring both his personal background, an upbringing steeped in wealth, and societal attitudes toward individuals like Judge Thompson who challenged such entrenched privilege. Commentators debated whether his behavior represented a larger cultural disdain for authority when it comes from traditionally marginalized groups. Public perception began to shift dramatically. Once heralded as a savvy businessman who had cultivated his success through sheer determination and ruthless tactics, Harrington was now portrayed as a symbol of outdated entitlement, his legacy associated more with failure than triumph. Editorials questioned not just his character but also whether his wealth had allowed him to operate outside moral boundaries that others were held accountable for. This media frenzy created a ripple effect throughout financial circles. Investors became increasingly wary of being linked to Harrington's businesses, as news outlets reported swirling allegations of unethical practices in his prior dealings. Stock values declined further. Analysts pointed out that potential partners would now think twice before associating themselves with someone whose behavior drew widespread scrutiny. In sharp contrast, Angela Thompson received commendation from numerous quarters for her poise and dedication to justice. Articles praised her abilities as a jurist, emphasizing her commitment not only to fairness but also her poised challenge to systemic norms that prioritize wealth over integrity. She became a beacon for those advocating for equitable treatment within establishments historically resistant to change. As national conversations emerged following the incident, those who had long felt disenfranchised began vocalizing their concerns more vocally, encouraged by a newfound sense of agency catalyzed by Thompson's ruling. Activists spoke passionately at rallies organized in support of addressing racial disparities in judicial outcomes, echoing themes central to this case. Throughout this unfolding narrative, Maxwell Harrington found himself at the center of scrutiny, a reality he had never faced previously. As he read articles discrediting him and listened to commentators dissect his every move, he recognized how rapidly public perception could shift against even the mightiest individuals when their actions contradicted communal ideals around respect and accountability. In this intense media spotlight, Judge Angela Thompson remained resilient. She understood more than most what was at stake, not just her position or reputation but also the opportunity for lasting change within an imperfect system desperately needing reform. As the dust settled from the courtroom proceedings and the weight of his losses began to sink in, Maxwell Harrington found himself grappling with a tumult of emotions. Denial was the first to take hold. He couldn't believe that a single act of defiance, a refusal to stand, could lead to the unraveling of everything he had built. "It's just a gesture," he thought, trying to convince himself that it hadn't meant anything significant. Yet, deep down, he felt an unsettling truth begin to gnaw at him. His actions had spoken volumes about who he was. Anger soon followed, boiling within him like a storm. How dare Judge Thompson and the public hold him accountable for what he perceived as a minor infraction? He had spent years cultivating an image of success and power, one that portrayed him as a self-made man deserving of respect and admiration. To have that dismantled by what he considered a trivial incident felt like an affront not only to his pride but also to his identity. "They don't understand what it's like at my level," he grumbled to himself, clinging to the thought that those who criticized him were simply envious or misinformed. But as days turned into weeks and reality set in more firmly, Harrington could no longer ignore the creeping realization that his worldview had been fundamentally flawed. The media onslaught exposed not just his courtroom behavior but also dredged up past allegations of unethical practices, the very things he had long dismissed as mere gossip or jealousy from adversaries. Suddenly, everything felt intertwined. His arrogance, entitlement, and disregard for others were laid bare in stark contrast to Judge Thompson's poised determination. Maxwell began to reflect on the privilege that had sheltered him throughout his life. He realized that while he had always viewed himself as a product of hard work and tenacity, he had simultaneously benefited from systemic advantages that others did not enjoy. The idea that someone like Judge Thompson could rise so high in a system designed against her only further illuminated how blind he had been to societal inequalities. In moments of solitude, when the noise of his crumbling empire faded into silence, Harrington faced uncomfortable truths about himself. His biases and prejudices began surfacing like unwelcome guests at a party. He recalled interactions where he dismissed concerns raised by employees or business partners based on their backgrounds or critiques stemming from racial dynamics. Each memory weighed heavily upon him. They were reminders of times when he prioritized profit over principle. As anger transformed into frustration with himself, Maxwell found moments of clarity amidst this chaos. He recognized that true power did not stem from wealth alone. Rather, it encompassed respect for others and an understanding of shared humanity. His past actions reflected a narrow-mindedness that prevented genuine connections with people outside his affluent circle, a realization that left him feeling isolated even amid once loyal friends. Seeking redemption became an unexpected desire as Harrington contemplated how to carve out a new path forward. The prospect terrified him, It required vulnerability and humility, traits he had long associated with weakness rather than strength. Yet somewhere deep inside, there flickered hope for transformation. Perhaps this could be an opportunity to redefine who he was beyond mere titles and bank accounts. In this period of reflection, Maxwell acknowledged that there would be no quick fixes or easy answers. Change would require intentionality and sustained effort. With every passing day since the court ruling, the echoes of Judge Thompson's voice resonated in his mind. "Your actions have consequences." Those words became a constant reminder that growth comes from confronting rather than denying discomfort. As Maxwell Harrington wrestled with these revelations, one thing became clear. The journey toward accountability would not only reshape his identity but also challenge him to forge a new legacy, one rooted in respect for others rather than blind entitlement. Whether this road led back toward reclaiming lost status or forging entirely new paths remained uncertain. What was undeniable was that real change often begins with facing oneself in the mirror and daring to confront what lies within. In the wake of the courtroom incident and Judge Angela Thompson's ruling, responses from various communities began to emerge, reflecting the complex tapestry of societal attitudes toward race, privilege, and justice. For many, especially within marginalized communities and advocacy groups, Angela Thompson became a symbol of justice, a beacon shining through a system long perceived as biased against those who fall outside the circles of wealth and influence. The narrative that developed around her painted a picture of resilience and unwavering commitment to equality. People rallied in support of her actions, hosting vigils and discussions centered on promoting systemic change and accountability. Activists took to social media platforms with fervor, using hashtags like #JusticeForAngela and #BreakTheSilence to amplify their voices. They shared personal stories of discrimination and inequality, creating an outpouring of solidarity that transcended geographical boundaries. Many praised Thompson for standing firm against Harrington's arrogance, an act they saw as embodying the fight against historical injustices that minorities have faced in America's judicial system. Conversely, there were also communities that rallied behind Maxwell Harrington, casting him as a victim of an overzealous judicial system gone awry. This group often included individuals from affluent backgrounds who viewed his punishment as excessive, arguing that the media had sensationalized the incident to fit a narrative that painted wealthy individuals in a negative light. They claimed that Harrington's refusal to stand was merely an expression of personal freedom rather than an act laced with racism. Commentators on various platforms discussed how wealth should afford an individual certain privileges, including leniency in judgment when it comes to perceived social faux pas. Supporters claimed that Harrington had been unjustly targeted due to his status, asserting that he was being used as a scapegoat for broader societal issues surrounding race. In their view, his financial success offered him both freedom and responsibility, freedom to express himself without fear of retribution. They argued for the importance of allowing powerful figures some leeway in their expressions while emphasizing that society should focus on reforming deeper systemic issues rather than vilifying individuals based solely on their wealth or status. However, this defense often met with backlash from online activists who felt it trivialized Harrington's blatant disrespect towards Judge Thompson, a violation they deemed unacceptable regardless of its context. Supporters of the judge emphasized that such thinking perpetuated a cycle where men like Harrington felt emboldened by privilege rather than accountable for their actions. Public forums erupted with discussions on race dynamics within power structures. Town halls held debates about whether rich individuals should be held to stricter standards given their influence over societal norms. The arguments illustrated stark divides, a reflection not just on Harrington or Thompson but also on America's ongoing struggle with racial equity. As months passed following the ruling, community gatherings transformed into movements demanding accountability across various sectors, businesses scrutinizing their treatment of employees based on race or background while political discussions shifted toward advocating reforms in legal systems perceived as favoring those with wealth. Judge Angela Thompson found herself at the center of this evolving discourse, not just as a figurehead but as part of a larger movement advocating for lasting change. The publicity surrounding her ruling catalyzed ongoing conversations about what justice truly means in a society still grappling with structural inequalities. Maxwell Harrington's name persisted in headlines but now carried dual meanings, a warning against unchecked entitlement, while simultaneously sparking debate about how society addresses power imbalances. As each community reacted differently to his downfall and her rise, it became clear that this incident would resonate far beyond courtroom walls. It marked not just an individual encounter between two people but served as a pivotal moment illuminating broader cultural dialogues about race, privilege, and accountability in America today. In the weeks following the devastating court ruling, Maxwell Harrington found himself at a crossroads, grappling with his tarnished reputation and the remnants of his crumbling empire. As he reflected on the consequences of his past actions, a flicker of realization ignited within him. Perhaps this was not just an opportunity for personal redemption but a chance to effect genuine change in a world rife with inequality. Determined to reclaim some semblance of honor, Maxwell reached out to local nonprofit organizations dedicated to racial justice and community empowerment. Initially, he approached these groups with skepticism. After all, he had always been accustomed to wielding power rather than being on the receiving end of it. Yet, as he attended meetings and listened intently to the stories and struggles shared by those impacted by systemic injustice, something began to shift within him. Maxwell volunteered for community service initiatives aimed at bridging divides between affluent neighborhoods and marginalized communities. He found himself in food banks serving meals side by side with individuals whose lives had been shaped by hardship, a stark contrast to the lavish events he was used to attending. The experience opened his eyes to realities he had long ignored. He quickly learned that empathy could not be bought or fabricated. It required genuine engagement and vulnerability. His first project involved working with children from underserved backgrounds. Each Saturday morning, Maxwell would help mentor these youngsters, sharing life skills while listening to their aspirations. As he watched them flourish in their creative pursuits, he felt a growing desire not just to support them materially but also to advocate for policy changes that would provide them opportunities they otherwise wouldn't have. However, this journey toward redemption was not without its challenges. Many community members remained wary of his intentions, viewing him through the lens of his previous arrogance and privilege. At times, he was met with hostility. Some questioned whether his efforts were sincere or simply a means of restoring his public image. These confrontations were difficult for Maxwell. He had always been revered or feared but had never faced outright rejection before. Yet each interaction prompted further introspection, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his past behaviors and attitudes. He followed through on Judge Thompson's mandate by participating in workshops focused on anti-racism initiatives, sessions that educated participants on historical injustices and systemic biases affecting marginalized communities. While grappling with his discomfort during these discussions, Harrington began to recognize how deeply ingrained prejudice can manifest, even in those who see themselves as well-meaning. As months passed, Maxwell's commitment grew evident. He began advocating for local policies that supported educational funding and equitable resource distribution. He leveraged his connections, not for personal gain but rather as a means of amplifying the voices of those historically silenced. He found himself attending rallies alongside activists who fought tirelessly for change, a far cry from the insulated lifestyle he had led before. Despite facing criticism from some quarters who questioned his sincerity or doubted whether a man like him could ever truly understand their struggles, Maxwell pressed forward. Each act of service became a step toward dismantling both personal biases and societal barriers, an ongoing process requiring ongoing effort rather than instant gratification. The transformation was gradual but profound. What started as an attempt at redemption evolved into a genuine commitment to social justice. As Maxwell Harrington moved through this journey, he discovered that true change is rooted in understanding that privilege carries responsibility, not just for oneself but for uplifting others. Through this redemptive arc, he began questioning whether systemic change is genuinely achievable when entrenched interests often resist accountability. Yet amidst the uncertainty surrounding such transformative endeavors lay hope, the belief that even those who have faltered can rise up again when driven by purpose and awareness. In seeking redemption through community engagement and anti-racism work, Maxwell Harrington found not only a path toward restoring his identity but also an opportunity to advocate meaningfully for lasting change, one step at a time. through genuine connection with those who had long fought against inequity in their lives. As the dust settled from the high-profile court case, Judge Angela Thompson found herself at an unexpected crossroads, her position solidified not just by her ruling against Maxwell Harrington but by the profound impact it had on the landscape of justice and equality. Her decisive actions had transformed her from a respected jurist into a national symbol of resilience, standing tall against the tide of privilege and entitlement that often dictated the judicial system. In the months following the case, the ripple effects of her landmark decision became evident. Legal scholars began analyzing her ruling in law schools across the country, discussing how it represented a shift in judicial attitudes toward issues of race, discrimination, and accountability. Angela's courtroom demeanor, a perfect blend of authority and empathy, was lauded as a model for aspiring judges everywhere. She quickly became a sought-after speaker at conferences and community events, sharing her insights on promoting diversity within the legal profession and advocating for marginalized communities. Meanwhile, advocacy groups reached out to her, inviting her to lend her voice to various social justice initiatives. The respect she commanded allowed her to galvanize support for causes that had long been viewed as unattainable. Whether it was participating in legislative discussions aimed at reforming systemic inequalities or supporting young lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds, Judge Thompson's legacy began to extend far beyond the confines of the courtroom. However, with newfound recognition came increased scrutiny. Angela found herself navigating a complex world of media attention, her every decision analyzed and dissected. While many celebrated her courage and integrity, others criticized her as a powerful figure attempting to reshape justice according to her own narrative. It was essential for Angela to maintain authenticity amidst these pressures, ensuring she stayed true to the values that had propelled her story thus far. Despite occasional frustrations with public expectations, Angela remained resolute. She committed herself to mentoring young women of color pursuing careers in law, sharing not just her successes but also the challenges she had faced along the way. Her dedication inspired a new generation, showing them that even in a field historically resistant to change, their voices mattered and could lead to real transformation. Though Judge Thompson was celebrated for her bravery, she was acutely aware that the fight for justice did not end with one ruling. It was part of a larger movement. The discussions sparked by her decisions continued to evolve, pushing society to reevaluate its ingrained beliefs about race and privilege. Communities across the nation banded together in solidarity, emboldened by Thompson's actions as they pushed back against systemic injustices within their respective spheres. Maxwell Harrington's eventual attempts at redemption played into this narrative as well. As he journeyed through self-reflection and community service efforts, conversations around privilege became even more nuanced. Many viewed his transformation as a testament to the potential for growth, proof that even those who had fallen from grace could rise again when faced with accountability. This evolution collided significantly with Angela's legacy. She had inspired not just change in herself but also in those around her. Angela's actions had ignited protests, discussions, and educational initiatives aimed at eradicating prejudice while fostering inclusivity, encouraging those who had once felt powerless to demand change. As waves of activism surged forward, spurred on by her stance against Harrington, the courtroom incident evolved into a pivotal moment in American history that resonated deeply within the broader cultural context. In reflecting upon her career years down the line, Judge Angela Thompson realized that her legacy extended far beyond a single case or ruling. It embodied hope and collective effort toward equality. She would be remembered not only for enforcing justice but as a trailblazer whose influence helped pave paths for generations of future leaders devoted to creating a fairer society. Emerging from this profound chapter in her life, Angela understood that true change requires ongoing commitment, an unwavering focus on justice, and above all, unity across diverse communities seeking equity and respect. Her journey reaffirmed that while challenging entrenched systems may be daunting, it is through perseverance and collective action that transformative change can be achieved. The case involving Judge Angela Thompson and billionaire Maxwell Harrington served as a pivotal moment not just in their lives, but also in the broader societal conversation about racism, privilege, and accountability. This incident brought to light the deeply entrenched attitudes that persist within systems of power and provoked critical reflection among various communities and individuals. Judge Thompson's steadfast commitment to justice shone bright in an era where many felt disillusioned by the legal system. Her decision to confront Harrington's blatant disrespect resonated with those who had long been marginalized, creating a ripple effect that transcended courtroom walls. Many saw her as a trailblazer, someone who dared to challenge the status quo while advocating for fairness for all. The resulting public discourse sparked dialogue around systemic racism, highlighting how privilege can obscure the realities faced by others. Yet, her actions raised important questions about how society views accountability, especially regarding individuals with wealth and influence who often evade consequences for unreflected behavior. Some argued that Harrington's punishment was necessary to ensure justice. Others cautioned against viewing it as an isolated incident rather than part of a pattern of institutional bias that disproportionately affects marginalized groups. As community members gathered in support of Judge Thompson, they also initiated programs aimed at addressing inequalities within their own neighborhoods. This grassroots movement became a testament to collective action sparked by one woman's bravery, a recognition that social justice requires collaboration across various strands of society. Activists organized town hall meetings focusing on education reform, police accountability, and equitable resource distribution, urging government officials to take serious measures toward dismantling systemic barriers. On the flip side, there remained factions that defended Harrington's character and status. Wealthy supporters framed him as an emerging victim of a biased judicial system, suggesting that his punishment reflected societal envy more than genuine justice. This response illustrated how deeply ingrained notions of privilege can lead some individuals to dismiss or undermine systemic issues faced by underrepresented groups. This dynamic revealed the difficulty in navigating discussions surrounding race and class in America. While there was widespread support for Thompson's stance against Harrington's disrespectful behavior, opposition arose from those who perceived any challenges to wealth or authority as unjust attacks. As Maxwell Harrington moved through his path toward redemption, he began engaging with advocacy groups working toward racial equality, his initial hesitance dampened by moments of clarity regarding his own biases. His public attempts to participate in community service offered glimpses into what transformation could look like but also showcased the skepticism he encountered from those he hoped to support. Through these interactions, it became clear: redemption is not merely an individual quest but requires mutual understanding and connectivity between different communities striving for change. Maxwell's journey served as an intriguing parallel to Judge Thompson's rise. Their paths diverged significantly yet remained interconnected through shared themes of struggle, reflection, and the potential for personal growth amid adversity. In this unfolding narrative where both figures experienced growth, Angela solidifying her place as a leader advocating justice while Maxwell sought to reconcile his past with his present, the overarching theme emerged: real change will only be possible when society collectively addresses uncomfortable truths about privilege and accountability. This story serves as a call to action for readers, to reflect not only on individual beliefs but also on how these beliefs contribute to larger societal structures. It prompts introspection regarding personal roles in perpetuating or dismantling inequity within one's community. As we navigate our own journeys through life's complexities, acknowledging the nuances of race, power dynamics, and personal responsibility, it becomes evident that true progress requires continued dialogue and actionable steps while fostering unity across diverse communities dedicated to creating a more equitable future for all. In doing so, we honor those brave enough to challenge injustice head-on, inspiring them through our collective efforts toward change that echoes long past our immediate surroundings.